overall selection in the 2022 NHL Draft belongs to the Philadelphia Flyers. Number 4, the Seattle Kraken. Number 3, the Arizona Coyotes. Number 2, the New Jersey Devils. The first overall selection in the 2022 NHL Draft belongs to the Montreal Canadiens.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 5-Hole Fantasy Hockey Podcast. I'm your host today, TJ Branson. Today we have Will Scouch in the studio. We're going to be continuing our Dynasty series. If you guys want to find us, we're on Twitter at FHF Hockey. We got a fantasy hockey Discord that you are more than welcome to join, discuss any extras that you might want from this show. But today we're going to bring Will on the show. We're going to be talking about a bunch of players from the 2022 draft class. We're going to have a sneak peek at who might be the Calder candidates for next year. Little extras like who have been Will's favorites to track from this class. Maybe some late round steals for us in fantasy drafts. And I got a draft question that's 2 weeks old for Stolpskata on Reddit. So if you're listening, I hope you dig that one. But anyway, let's get to the talk with Will. Thank you guys for listening. Will, thanks so much for hanging out today. Happy that you had some time for me. But before we go into draft season, you're mentioning how busy it is. And man, I just wonder what these weeks leading up to it look like for you.
Yeah, it's weird. Like, part of me still wants to keep watching games. Part of me still wants to keep, crossing the T's, dotting the I's. Part of me really, really wants to just keep cramming. But then also I've got video work to finish, and I've got stuff I need to write, and all kinds of stuff that just keeps knocking me around a little bit. And, I also feel at this point of the year is kind of when I start watching guys and going, okay, I'm not moving these guys around a whole lot. It's, maybe a spot here, a spot there, and I'm getting kind of nitpicky and at this point I kind of know what I think. So now it's more just sort of maybe not so much tracking games, but watching some tape and just making sure that I'm not, crazy, or at least that crazy. And it's busy, but it creeps up real quick on you. It's fun work, it's good stuff, but yeah, it's transformed and it's a little different right now, but yeah, busy times.
Are you getting to go out to Montreal to the draft?
Yes, I will be there. So I'm leaving. I'll be there for the whole week, actually. So I'll be there the Sunday before the draft, and I'll be leaving the Sunday after the draft. So got a nice stretch of time in town.
Great city.
See some people, hang out in the city. Yeah, I love Montreal. So looking forward to it. Should be a lot of fun.
Let everybody know where they can find you, where they can find your work, what they can click on.
So you can find me mostly on Twitter and YouTube. So twitter.com/scouching or youtube.com/scouching. Those are the two main ones. I also write for mckeenshockey.com. Our draft guide just came out. It turned out really, really good. A little bit of writing in there from myself and the video team, that some guys that we watched and some guys that we think are underrated and all that fun stuff. And you can also directly support my project on patreon.com/scouching or from any YouTube video, YouTube, Twitter, and McKean's. Those are the usual places. Yeah.
So I want to touch on something without giving too much away from the articles you guys wrote, but maybe off the top, you could let us know who some of the guys that stand out that are getting underrated in this draft class are, without, deferring too many clicks away. I don't want to spoiler alert.
Of course. I mean, I think what's interesting about this year is there's a lot of candidates for that kind of thing. I think there's a lot of guys who have upside and a lot of guys who have a lot of risk, and some have both. I am very curious about guys that I just know are going to be available later than they should go. Guys like Lane Hudson come to mind. Jagger Furcus comes to mind. Noah Ostlund. These are riskier picks, I would say, but I think that the risk is worth it with what they bring to the table. If you're further down the board, maybe people forget about maybe a decent goal scorer down the road and a guy like Rutger McGroarty. But I mean, I have him ranked a little bit lower than a lot of people. But guys stick out. Maybe like I don't know. I think Paul Ludwinski is a guy who I think has NHL upside that you might be able to get later in the draft than you would expect. But there's a lot of guys that I think if they break right, they could produce a lot of points. I thought Ty Nelson had a pretty questionable season in a lot of different ways, but I feel like there's a different type of player there that you could unlock, and a bit more of a diverse offensive guy, because we can talk about Ty Nelson all day because he was a very fascinating one. Same thing kind of for Denton Matejchuk, as a guy who's playing D that I think is risky in terms of an NHL player, but if he works out, he could be a thing. Like, he could be a really interesting offensive defenseman. He might even be a guy that a team tries out on the wing. Like, he's just a really interesting offensive player. But there's a lot of guys though, where all of the guys I just mentioned, there's risk and there's question marks and stuff where you're going to need development. You're going to need time and patience with these guys, and not to rush them along, and keep focused on their pros relative to their cons. The guy I love the most relative to the market, it seems, is Gleb Trikazov, who is a Russian guy playing in Omsk. I think he's one of the best shooters in the draft. Brings good playmaking as well. Just a really good offensive producer, in my opinion. Really young for the draft too. I think he's about a month away from 2023 eligibility, which is, a bonus in my mind. I think there's a lot of guys this year that I think could fall under that category of, you might get some good value out of them if the NHL team that drafts them plays their cards right.
I'm curious now that we were talking a little about Russian. There was this guy, Andrei Kuzmenko, who just signed with Vancouver. Can you tell me something about this guy?
I've had my eye on Kuzmenko since 2016. That guy is one of the, he's a guy who, went undrafted completely. I was kind of wondering why he went undrafted when a guy he played on a line with, Andrei Svetlakov, got drafted by the Minnesota Wild, I believe. And I thought of the two of them, I thought Kuzmenko was the better one. But I guess in that situation, Kuzmenko probably just told him he was probably never coming over or whatever, and they didn't want to deal with a guy who they drafted who had no interest in coming over. But here he is. He's slowly gotten better. I love the skill he brings. He's a diverse scorer. He can score himself, but he can set plays up. I don't think he's going to be like an Artemi Panarin level free agent signing here. I don't think he's going to be a top end player in the NHL, but I do think he'll be an NHL player, a middle six guy. I don't think he's much of a checking line guy, but maybe more of a finisher, an auxiliary offensive guy. Like, he's not going to run transitions. He's not going to run your breakout, but he's a good finisher, a good skilled guy. And for a guy that is not a draft pick or not a guy you have to get out in a trade, I thought Vancouver did really well. A really, really interesting pickup. Probably one of the few guys in the KHL where I feel pretty comfortable about them as an NHL player and doing something. So I don't expect huge things out of him in the NHL, but I think he'll be a perfectly solid, rock solid NHL player.
Now, we're coming from like a fantasy slant here. We're looking for, highest point ceiling hits, penalty minutes, even in some cases, blocks, power play specialist, that kind of thing. I want to talk about maybe some of the top end names out of this draft: Shane Wright, Logan Cooley, Jaroslav Koski, and the two premier defensemen as well. I'm curious, which of these do you think are going to have the most, I guess, return on investment when it comes to fantasy?
Yeah, I think the easiest one to point at is Logan Cooley. That guy, I think, is the most creative offensive mind out there. I think Shane Wright is the smartest offensive mind in terms of knowing when to make passes, knowing how to get passes through traffic, and he's got a really, really good shot as well. Quick release on his wrist shot, especially. But Logan Cooley, I think, brings a little bit more of that high-paced, dynamic sort of, I'm going to dictate the play, rather than Shane Wright, who sort of analyzes and reads and makes anticipatory reads on the play. And I feel like Cooley just brings a little bit more of that swagger to his game. But I think that at the end of the day, these two guys might end up coming out in the wash in terms of point production. I think you're going to maybe get comparable levels of secondary fantasy stuff there, like hits and blocks. Like, I'm not looking at those guys as a particularly huge generator of those kinds of metrics. Even a guy like Yuri Slafkovsky, like, you might look at him and go, well, he's 6'4". Like, that means he can throw his weight around and everything. And, I don't see him as like a Tom Wilson kind of guy. That's not the type of player Slafkovsky is. He's much more of a finesse, more skill first kind of guy that size. At least I haven't seen it in the games I've seen. So I'm not sure how much of that secondary stuff he'll bring out, unless whoever drafts him goes, hey, this is our goal for you. Like, let's get you more physical. Let's get you using your frame a little bit more defensively and bringing that. And I think he could be a little more well-rounded in that sense of being both a producer and a hits and blocks generator there. The guy that I'm really interested in is David Jiricek. He's a guy who's a big wild card to me. He got hurt. He didn't look quite the same after he came back from being hurt, but he had been out for, I believe, 4 or 5 months at that point, and you're never going to look like the same player after missing 5 months. But he was a player who I think also is one of the few in this draft, especially at defense, where I watched him and he plays like he's really trying to get out there and crush people. He'll get into the corners, he'll fight along the boards, he'll throw those hits. They don't always work. He needs to get stronger, needs to get a little bit more filled out than he is, but he's a guy who I definitely think could put up some of those secondary metrics and has enough offensive skill that if you are looking for a defenseman, that there could be something there, like a nice, well-rounded player. Like, the player he really reminds me of is Mikhail Sergachev, just a big but skilled and rangy guy that can play offensively, but also throw his weight around defensively. Nemec, I think, is more of a point producer. If you're looking for a guy that can run the power play or carry pucks up the ice and just play that kind of brand of defense, then I think that's a good option for you. Like, that's the thing about this draft is there's a lot of guys that I think when we look back in 5 or 7 years, we'll go, yeah, like this guy went 7th, but you could have taken him at 3, or this guy went 10th, you could have taken him at 7, or this guy went 3, you could have waited until 8 and gotten him, but you're happy. Like, there's a lot of varying types of players that all fill, in a fantasy perspective, different categories in different ways that might, I don't know, I feel like it might end up coming out in the wash, or at least it's very hard to tell how things might turn out. But there are players that play a certain brand that might boost certain categories, I would say.
So it sounds like if you're drafting first overall, you're between Wright and Cooley, and it sounds like Cooley's got the ceiling, but Wright might have the floor.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think Cooley might be a guy that, when we're looking back on their careers, he might have a little bit better point production over a large sample kind of thing. But Shane Wright is going to get every opportunity to play every minute he possibly wants, and he might, just by virtue of Cooley going to college and Wright almost likely going to the NHL almost certainly next season, and the fact that you're going to have Shane Wright probably on a line with a guy like, I don't know, Cole Caulfield, or insert skilled player that the Canadiens might have on their team, it could work out for him. I mean, he's going to probably get every chance to produce. So I feel like that's just the safer bet. If I'm the Montreal Canadiens, that's the direction I'm going. And you set your expectations reasonably and go, look, like, we don't think you're Connor McDavid. I don't think he's on that level, but I feel like he's going to be a very important part of what the future of the Habs looks like. And he needs guys to play with, I think, to really maximize what he brings to the table. But if they do that, I think he's going to have no problem scoring. And Cooley, I think, can maybe do a little bit more on his own, but at the same time, it really depends on how things go over the next few years. But Wright is probably the guy that I would lean towards at 1.
So there's a couple other guys a little bit further down the list, Joakim Kemell and Jonathan Lekkerimäki, guys that have had like a wide range of projections. I'm seeing some of them in the top 5, some of them as late as like 10, 15. What is causing the disparity between these guys? Is there levels of uncertainty about some of their skills, ceilings? What have you noticed on these guys?
Well, those two guys fit the exact same archetype of guys who, granted, they're playing at a very high level. They both played men's league hockey for large stretches of this season, but they are scoring forwards who don't get to scoring position. They are guys who are more perimeter focused, more perimeter shot based, guys who are maybe a little bit not as effective in transition, but they're good finishers, right? Like, these are guys who are among the better scorers in the draft. Like, if you just want a guy who can shoot right now and you want to work around that in terms of high upside potential, Lekkerimäki could be a really interesting pickup. I feel like he kind of struggles to drive play on his own, but he got better as the year went on. He's a little bit more comfortable with his skill level. I just worry about his pace, but in the offensive zone, if he finds some room, you're in trouble. And the same kind of thing can be said for Joakim Kemell, a guy who I think has really good finishing ability, comes and goes with regards to his overall impact on the game, in my view, but a guy who I still think finishes well, scores well. It's just these guys shoot from everywhere a lot. And that always scares me. Those types of players, I feel like, take a little bit longer to develop. They have a lot more question marks about them, like Eeli Tolvanen syndrome a little bit. It's just that these guys are playing against men, where Tolvanen was playing at the USHL level at the time of his draft. So, yeah, I think the disparity comes from, are people looking for guys who can have an overall impact on the game and not just putting the puck in the net, or are people more interested in who do I want to send pucks to in the offensive zone and have them do the rest of the job? And if you're more interested in the latter, then yeah, Kamel and Lekaramaki stick out more. But I'm more of the former personally, and especially with sort of top 10 picks, and you got to be a hell of a score for me to put you in that range. And Kamel and Lekaramaki, I think, are just outside that range, but these are guys that I would expect might take a little bit longer to really hit the potential they have in the NHL.
In terms of defensemen, the first couple rounds are chock full of them, but we're hearing a lot about Nemec and Jiricek here. The second tier, maybe ranging from 10 all the way through till maybe 40. It's a pretty wide tier of defensemen. Are there any that stand out to you more than the others?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting year for a lot of defensemen. It's one of the more intriguing groups of defenders. I think last year there was a lot of really good defensemen that I think you could look at and go, okay, I can see the types of players these are. They're well refined. They kind of have a lot of really interesting qualities about them. There might be some risk, but I get it. This year, it's like that, but more extreme. I am really, really fascinated, though, with the potential of a lot of these guys. Guys like Seamus Casey, guys like, who else is on here? Lane Hudson, we mentioned earlier. The potential of a guy like Owen Pickering, a big, thin, rangy, skilled defenseman, who I think has potential, but it's not quite solidified yet. Kallio Delius, Sam Renzel, these are really raw defensemen that I think have a better version of themselves locked away in there. Ty Nelson's another one. And I'd be very fascinated to see, because I feel like these guys are going to be available later than I have them ranked, and I would just be more than happy trading back and just drafting a bunch of them. Even the guys that I think are more solidified in what they are, guys like Pavel Mintyukov, Kevin Korchinski, even a Leon Bixel. These are guys that I think you can tell what they're going to be. They might not be top pair guys. They might not even be Kevin Korchinski and Mintyukov might be second pair guys that can play in a variety of situations, especially offensively. But these are guys that you can kind of tell what roles are going to play in the NHL. So yeah, it's a really intriguing year. I think I'm more interested in the potential of the defensemen this year as opposed to the forwards, but I do think there are a lot of interesting forwards that could fill out a lineup. I think there's a lot of defensemen that have a lot of potential but a really low floor. But up front, I think there's a lot of guys that could chip in an NHL team, but maybe don't have the all-around sort of upside or high-end target that a lot of these defensemen might have if they break the right way.
So I want to focus hard now on maybe just the whole class. And for the highest fantasy appeal, it seems like we kind of covered the highest point ceiling with possibly Logan Cooley, even Shane Wright up there. Let's look for that Tom Wilson now. Who is the hits, the penalty, the pest guy? Yeah,
all around, it's hard. I find in the years I've been doing this, it's kind of hard to identify just who the players are going to be that are that pest type. But you can, I think, identify the players who are just all over the ice, guys who are going to just grind and grind and grind all night, right? Like Liam Ogren is one who I think is going to have no problem with an NHL coach being like, get out there again, just keep going, do what you're doing. He's just constantly out there working. He's got some offensive tools, but he's constantly getting involved in play. Same thing with Frank Nazar. I think that's a guy who I've seen him ranked more towards the back half of the first round. And if that's a guy that a contending team can add, in that 20 to 32 range, I think that's hilarious. You could just end up with one of the best hard-working guys in the draft. I mean, if Frank Nazar were 3 inches taller, I bet he would be locked in the top 7 or 8, I would say, in this year's draft. And he's not in that range for me. But in terms of just grinding out plays, finishing plays in the offensive end, especially, if he can just bring a little bit more intensity defensively, he could be a guy that brings up a lot of those sort of all situations metrics, I would say. Connor Geekie, I feel like a team could turn him as well into one of these sort of all-around guys. I think his offensive potential might be a little limited, but I feel like he'll go out there and kill penalties from time to time. He's a big body. He can throw his weight around at time. Nathan Gautier is another one. If you're later on in the draft, I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of fantasy leagues kind of forget about Nathan Gautier. And honestly, I'm kind of guilty of the same thing myself. But that's only because I think that his upside is kind of limited, but his floor is really simple. He could be a guy that goes out there and he smashes guys. He's a straightforward, speedy skater. He's big. There's not a much diversity to his game, but you could pat him on the back and go out there and, free up loose pucks and grind out play, and he'll do it, and he's pretty good at it. And the only other one I think that I can really mention off the top of my head like that is Paul Ludwinski, who flies under the radar because he plays with Shane Wright off and on. He didn't score a ton of points this year, but he's a guy that I think is kind of undervalued. I think he's a guy that if he goes through some skills training and learns how to sort of push and pull his feet a little bit in terms of the pace that he plays at, I think he could unlock a lot of offensive potential, because that guy generates a lot of chances but can't finish to save his life in a lot of the games that I've seen. But he's always out there, getting involved in play, driving possession offensively, and moving his feet the whole time doing it. Like, he's a guy who's out there engaged all the time. And I think that goes a long way in the NHL. Like, in the NHL, you have less time to think because everyone else is engaged. And if he's already got that natural, I'm in go mode all the time mode, then I think that that's valuable. And if he's a guy that teams forget about, like Central Scouting has him ranked at 49 in North America, that's like maybe a third round pick. And if you can get a guy like that in the third round, I feel like he'll be a bottom 6 guy, and he could grind out some hits, block some shots, maybe chip in offensively if his development goes well. He's a guy that I think has flown under the radar. So there's a few of them that I think could fit this mold. Devin Kaplan's one more I'll mention, a big power forward for the NTDP who isn't really getting a lot of attention either and could also be a mid-round pick. There's a lot of interesting options for a guy like that might be able to be a bottom 6 checker that has some offensive tools as well, that could just be an all-around player that isn't at the top end of the draft but could still be pretty valuable, especially considering where you're picking them.
Who have been some of your favorite guys? Like, if you had to consider this the whole team, who's your favorite player on the team here?
I mean, Gleb Trikazov has been so much fun to watch. I love watching him. Same thing for Lane Hutson. If you want to give Lane Hutson a guy to play with, I mean, I love Vladimir Grudinin as well, Russian defenseman who's, not the biggest guy in the world, but one of the more skilled and dynamic defensemen that I've seen with the puck on his stick. And I think the production doesn't really indicate just how much offensive potential there is there. But yeah, Lane Hutson, Gleb Trikazov, definitely up there. Grudinin as well, I really, really enjoyed. There's a lot of guys also that I just have a lot of respect for when I watch them play. Like, they just seem to go out there and get it. Guys like Marco Kasper, Frank Nazar, Paul Ludwinski is another one. Guys where even if they might not have the most illustrious NHL career, you just enjoy watching them. And I'll throw a complete dark horse out there, a guy who I might not even get drafted, but I love a Japanese kid playing for Youngstown in the USHL, Kenta Isegai, who he's been all over the place. He played in like an Austrian junior league 2 years ago and played with guys that were 3 or 4 years older than him and shot the lights out and scored a ton of goals. The offense hasn't quite got there yet for him at Youngstown, but man, I've seen some real highlight reel stuff out of him. Really, really skilled, 145 pounds soaking wet, but that doesn't really bother me. He's really young. I think he's a September birthday for September 2004. So really, really young. And I think that there's a lot of headroom to work with a player like that, especially if you can sort of put a bit more weight on his frame. And he's a guy where if he's there in the 6th or 7th round, it might make people scratch their heads a little bit because he doesn't score a ton of points, but I've seen him do some stuff that I think there's a lot to work with there. So a lot of fun players to watch this year. I think it's just a matter of how much they'll actually project. But yeah, those guys have all been a ton of fun to watch.
We talked a little bit at the top of the show about maybe some guys with huge boom potential, but just as equally risking that bust. But, who are some second round and beyond steals, guys that you think might fit better in fantasy than in real life?
Well, that's the thing, right? That's what we're all looking for. And I think that I think there's going to be a few of them. I look at Seamus Casey as a guy that if he doesn't go in the first round, I am very, very interested in picking him up in that range if he's available. Same thing for Lane Hutson. Now, there's been a bit of talk about Lane Hutson that's a bit more favorable recently. I think that might change things for him a little bit. But at the end of the day, people still probably look at him and see a 5'9" defender and probably don't want to take that guy in the first round, but I would probably do it. There might be some interesting buy low potential on a guy like Adam Sikora, who I amazingly haven't mentioned as one of these all situations guys that could work out for a fantasy league. He's all over the ice all the time, checking guys, chasing guys down, trying to turn pucks around, driving pucks up the ice. He's also got some offense to him as well. And he might be a guy that you could get in that second round. I doubt he'd slip much further than that. I've been really interested in Elias Salamonson. He was a guy that I thought would be like a top 10 pick coming into this year, but he played this weird mirror image version of his game from last year. Like last year, he was playing with the puck a lot and skating up the ice with it and really sort of challenging defenders directly. But this year, it's the opposite. He played with very, very little in terms of involvement offensively, sat back a lot, but he seemed to be refining his defensive game. Like he really seemed to get stronger on his feet, really seemed to get stronger, chasing guys down along the boards and closing out defensive situations. A strong kid, I think, for his age. Also still very, very young for this draft. And I feel like if that's a guy who people just forget about and you could get him in the mid rounds, that, he's one of these guys that I think has a lot of negative inertia and teams might overcorrect or people might overcorrect on that and think he's just not very good. But I think there's an interesting 200-foot defenseman there. It's just a matter of getting him there. It's just been very, very weird watching him. The other thing that's tough is that this year's draft, I'm pretty sure the overall drop off in talent once you get outside of the first round gets a little bit questionable, but I think there are guys that I have ranked really high that you might be able to get later on than you would think. And the top name I think there is Seamus Casey, based on what I've seen him go. A couple of years at Michigan at that program, I think could do him wonders. Noah Östlund as well. I've heard that he might be a guy that goes in that third round range, and he's got scoring ability out the wazoo and a really, really good brain to go along with it. So there's a few options, I think, but once you get to a certain point in this draft, I think it gets a little tricky for sure to pick out like these are the guys that you definitely want and should be gone early. You might find value with a few Russians for extenuating circumstances, and that would probably be my strategy as well. But beyond that, it gets a little bit hairy.
Inside the top 10, given that we already know the draft order at this point, but are there any players that you think would be a perfect fit in a perfect system? Like, who are you kind of like rooting for Logan Cooley to go to, for Slafkovsky to go to? Like, who fits the system the best?
Yeah, I mean, I hope to see Shane Wright in Montreal for sure. I think that they need another. It would be nice for them to have another really good play driving center that can work off of faster and more skilled line mates. Not that he's not fast or skilled. He's just kind of a step behind. I know New Jersey fans really want Yuri Slafkovsky, and I can see how he would be a fit there for sure. So I'm not going to go against the grain on that. I think Logan Cooley, I think that my strategy would be sign a guy that kind of is like Yuri Slafkovsky and draft Logan Cooley and worry about the problems later. But that's just me. Logan Cooley in Arizona, like if Arizona sucks this year and they have Logan Cooley at college and they land someone like Connor Bedard or Adam Fantilli next year, that's a 1-2 punch that anyone would want. It might not be exciting for Arizona immediately if they get a Logan Cooley, but having him and one of those top two guys next year, that would really do wonders for their team. And I think that would put a lot of bums in seats. But I mean, Seattle has Matty Beniers. I mean, I don't know. It's tough. I would love to see someone who could slot in at center behind Beniers, and I doubt it would be Cooley, but it would be fun if it was. The interesting one for me is going to be like David Jiricek. I feel like David Jiricek in Philadelphia would be a ton of fun. Philadelphia had a guy like Radko Gudas for years, and he was a fun player to watch for a multitude of reasons. And I feel like Jiricek in Philadelphia, he's right up their alley in terms of that style of play that's mean and nasty and physical. And, I feel like they would understand that about him and sort of work with him to sort of get to that potential. It's just a matter of how much are they going to work that into his game as opposed to, the offensive side of his game that's still definitely there. Columbus is one that I'm also always just fascinated about. I have no idea who they should go and get. I would love to see them shock the world and get a guy like Gleb Trikazov at 6 or 12, because I feel like they drafted Chinikov, who came from the same program. They have their sort of fingers in that soup. They have they have roots there, and they've got two chances. And I think Gleb Trikazov is a great player. We'll see what happens with him there. I'd love to see a guy like Brad Lambert land in San Jose. I could talk about Brad Lambert all day. I feel like, they've drafted a lot of skilled wingers, a lot of guys who like to drive pace and are speedy and skilled. And I feel like they need a guy up the middle who can do the same thing, because they kind of haven't really drafted much of those. And at 11, I'd be shocked if Brad Lambert weren't there. I think it's more likely that Brad Lambert goes in the last 10 picks of the first round than the first 10, just based on what I've been hearing from people. But I still really like him, and I think San Jose would be a good landing spot where they could give him a bit of a reset and help him along and get him I guess, back on track in a way. So yeah, it's hard to see right now like who the good fits are. But I think of all of the ones I went over, the one I would love to see is Jiricek in Philadelphia, because I think that that's the type of player that they always kind of are looking for. They've tried to draft those before early in the first round, and I feel like they've missed the mark. But a guy like Jiricek, I think, is a different type of player than a guy like Sam Morin or the other big defensemen they've drafted over the last decade or so that just haven't really panned out. So it'll be really, really exciting to see who goes where for sure.
Yeah, I'm a Flyers fan, so I'm right there with you. I've heard a lot of Cutter Gautier here too.
Could make sense. Still not quite on the wavelength I see being a Philadelphia Flyer. I mean, I like Cutter Gautier, but I'm a little confused as to where all this really, really, really positive talk is coming about him. I've seen him a bunch of times this year, and top 5. If it happens, but probably not the direction I'd go. But, that's just me. David Jiricek in Philadelphia, though, a big, mean defenseman who can play with the puck. It would be a lot of fun.
And we just lost Moran, too. So
that's true.
I think it slots right in. I want to talk a little bit about this negative inertia again with specifically Brad Lambert. We dialed back the clocks 1 year, and Brad Lambert's almost a top 3 lock. And, maybe as far back as 2 years, because he was the guy. It was Shane Wright, Matthew Savoy, and Brad Lambert. Those were like the 1, 2, 3. And now obviously things have changed so much. So what is attributed to this free fall?
Oh God. Well, okay. So I think it's a lot of different things happening at once. I think people are borderline being disrespectful with the guy. I think there's a bunch of different stuff going on. I have a video report that's the next one going out to patrons. I should have it today or tomorrow. And it's Brad Lambert. It's the second last one. And Lambert was fascinating. If you look beyond just offensive production, he drove some of the best metrics I've ever seen in terms of driving pucks up the ice. With Jyväskylä, they gave him the puck a lot. He did a lot of really good stuff with it. He was passing the puck really well. In terms of volume, it wasn't great, but he knew when to pass the puck and he knew how to hit targets, which you can't say that for a lot of guys in this year's draft. He just was a brilliant puck handler and puck manager. He was frustrating at times and wasn't producing, but not for lack of trying. The team he played on wasn't particularly good. His line mates a lot of the time were bottom 6 AHL guys who were playing in the Liga. Not really a good match for him in my view. Like I can't remember the names of the guys that he played with, but it was rough. And the times when I saw him when the numbers were there was when he was playing with established Liga players or players who are legitimate NHL prospects. There was a line he played on with Jerry Turkalainen, who I think led his team in scoring, and Patrick Puistola, who's a pretty decent NHL prospect who's still developing overseas. And he played really well on that line, significantly better than playing with bottom 6 AHL guys. He moved to a new team over the winter, and things, I think, went from not so good to terrible. He did not really know how to use them pretty much across the board. It's indisputable in the data that I tracked that across the board, everything just took a nosedive. He became basically anyone else. And that's just not Brad Lambert. That just isn't him. I read a lot of reports and stuff from around the time, and Pelicans, the team he's playing with now, was saying, we needed some offensive boost to go on a playoff run, and we wanted an offensive player. So Brad made sense because he used to play here and he's from the area, blah, blah, blah. But that I didn't know that meant we just want a player and just a guy who we can put on the wing and hope that he scores, because that's not what he does. They don't give him the puck nearly as much. They put him in way less favorable situations with the puck. The way they break the puck out with that team is, just to explain, I've seen it a ton of times. And Brad Lambert, so they took him off the center, which I wouldn't do. To me, he's a center. But they put him on wing, and their breakouts, far more often than not, especially when they have time to think about it and time to plan, is a horizontal line. And they just, all 5 players skate up at the same pace, at the same speed up the ice. And it's like a flying capital I. It's not even a flying V. It's terrible. There's no momentum. There's no motion to it. You could put me on his line and it would be fine. It's just not conducive to success. I think in the last 4 games I tracked he was playing with this new team. And I think over the course of all of those games, he had every single one of his team's dangerous shot attempts. And I think there were only 3. So he's doing what he can. And I think people who, you can question his hockey IQ. There are areas of the game I think you can criticize that with regards to how he manages the puck, the decisions that he makes and everything. Yes, he tries to bite off a little more than he can chew. But to me, that's because there's no one else to eat the sandwich with him. He's literally on his own eating a sandwich he can't possibly finish himself. I don't know. I get the feeling that as soon as you put him, like it's like Atu Ratu last year, people were slandering that guy. And he was basically telling us, like, I need a reset. Like, I had a really bad year. I don't feel very good about my game. And now that the draft is out of the way and he's been loaned to a different team and a bit of a different look, he was way better. They gave him a bunch of ice time. They played him on their first line at center, and he's been great. And with Lambert, it'll be fascinating to see where we're at in 10 years when I look back. Because if I'm wrong, I'll have to rethink a lot. Because I've seen this guy. He's one of the fastest and most skilled players in the draft. In conjunction put together, he's just a tremendous hockey player that does not deserve to be as unsuccessful as he's been on the score sheet, and does not deserve the nosedive in quality of play that he had when he left his team and went home. We'll see what happens with him, but I don't know. I'm so confident that people are overcorrecting on him with that negative inertia. I could talk about him all day. It's just been really, really, really interesting to see.
It sounds like all the skills are still kind of baked into the player that he is. It's just been a mismanagement of his game.
I talk about this all the time on podcasts. Like, this comes up a few times. Like, people don't just forget how to play hockey, right? Like, if you've been playing hockey for 14 years of your life and you're 17 years old, one year to the next, you don't just forget how to play, right? Like, something must be going wrong. It just doesn't make sense any other way. Unless there are some situations where guys, let's say off the ice, maybe their lifestyle removes them from the focus and the time necessary to hit NHL level ability. But at the same time, like, plenty of NHL players do stuff in their private lives that might limit their ability. Like, it's so hard to tell. And I look at a guy like Brad Lambert and go, yeah, like, you didn't forget how to play hockey. The skill's there, the speed's there, the finishing ability just wasn't. He was snake bitten for a really long time and continued to be snake bitten for a really long time. But he was trying, like, he was really, really trying. And it just, I don't know. He's one of these guys. I want to get in a time machine, go forward a few years and see where we're at, because he's a tough one.
So I got a question here from somebody that reached out on Reddit. They reached out to me 2 weeks ago. They had the choice of Michael Fisher, Marcus Nguyen, some very late round guys, it feels like. Yara Lacia, you're going to have to help me with some of these names.
Yep.
Stephen Halliday, Gavin White, and Ty Young.
Yep.
Who would you take out of this crop and why?
I think my mind goes to Marcus Nguyen first and Michael Fisher second, I would say. I have Lassila and Fisher on the same level on my list. I have trouble with Halliday and Gavin White. Like, I don't know, it's pretty rare. It's pretty rare that guys that are 20 years old work out. It's pretty rare. Like, Tanner Pearson is an exception. Most of the time, junior aged players that are 20, it's a tough road, because that, those guys, a lot of the time, is Stephen Halliday going to go to college for 1 year? I mean, I don't mind Stephen Halliday from what I've seen, but again, you're looking at a 20-year-old who's 6'3" or whatever, playing against 17, 18-year-olds who aren't that big. Ty Young, I've noticed Ty Young here and there. He's faced insane workloads and played pretty well, but goalies, I don't know much about how to project goaltenders, but he stops pucks, and that matters. But I would focus on Fisher and Nguyen. Fisher is unproven, I think. He's a guy who I think is punching a little below his weight class, kind of an individualistic player, but pretty good in terms of skating with the puck in a straight line, finishing plays himself. Like, that guy can go end to end, and it's just that he can do that against prep school. I haven't seen it against a better competition level, because he hasn't really played at a better competition level. Like, last year, I was a little more confident about Scott Morrow because I had seen a lot more, and the skill level I thought was better. The deception and just the diversity of his game was a little better. Marcus Nguyen, I mean, I've just come to like him a lot more over the course of the year. Like, a really interesting, skilled guy, really good edges to gain separation from players. Didn't get as much ice time as you would hope, but still put up really good numbers in the data that I tracked that was relatively limited. So I'd say Nguyen, but if you're full of forwards, then maybe Michael Fisher. And the rest, I think it all comes out in the wash. Maybe Halliday, like, if you really want some size or some hits and stuff, that could be a thing. But Nguyen and Fisher, I think I'd lean in that direction.
Well, that one's for you, Stolpskata. I'm sorry to dox you. I hope your league mates might not be listening to this one, but hopefully you made those choices. I got one more question for you, Will. Thank you so much for being generous with your time here. I want to take a look 1 year into the future. We're talking about the Calder candidate class of 22-23. So all the guys that might be in systems already that are going to make their NHL debut. Who is your way too early, maybe top 5 Calder candidates?
Ooh, it's a great question because I think next year's group will be pretty good. Jake Sanderson comes to mind immediately. Owen Power, Matty Beniers, Mason McTavish, all could be guys that I think have really good, strong NHL debut years. Jake Sanderson, I think, is the one that I would want to keep an eye on first. I still will never count out Marco Rossi, and he still hasn't played much in the NHL. Marco Rossi could be up there. I think realistically a top 5, I would say Jake Sanderson, Owen Power, Matthew Beniers, Mason McTavish. Throw Marco Rossi in there just because I love the kid and I want him to be a superstar. Jack Quinn, I think, could be a dark horse. He had a great AHL year.
JJP too.
Yeah, JJP as well. Yeah, but I think I just really, really want Marco Rossi to really hit because he's been through a lot. Had a great year in the AHL from what I saw. And I would just love to see him in Minnesota do well next year.
Thanks so much, man. It's been a blast talking to you, and thanks for coming back on the show. Hope the rest of your day is just as good. And yeah, we got the night off. No hockey tonight, so enjoy it, man.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
All right, guys, there you have it. That is our chat, our Dynasty series talk with Will Scouch. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. Might have got some, we covered a lot of ground, man. Like I had, I don't know, maybe 10 players on the list here of guys that I was hoping to talk about. And I think we hit maybe 24. So huge thanks to Will for hanging out. You guys can find him on Twitter at Scouching and, subscribe to his Patreon. We do here at the 5 Hole Fantasy Hockey Podcast. We sub over there. He's got a Discord that comes along with the Patreon and he's putting out videos on these guys and a lot of really great stuff. So check Will out, support him. And thanks for hanging out, guys. If you guys want to follow us, we're on Twitter at FHF Hockey. We got the Fantasy Hockey Discord, and we'll talk to you next time. I think we got Tony Ferrari coming on later in the week. So look forward to talking to you guys then. See you. Love you.